Bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone. Bienvenue à ce 16e webinaire de la série CentrEau Hebd'Eau. Je m'appelle Jean Bergeron et je suis le coordonnateur de CentrEau à Sherbrooke. Veuillez noter que la présentation aujourd'hui sera en anglais. Donc, je vais poursuivre l'introduction en anglais pour faire changement. So the Hebd'Eau webinar series are short 20-minute long presentations made by CentrEau researchers or invited speakers who will present an aspect of their research or research subject in connection with the news or on water. So these presentations aim to showcase the research done at the center or by collaborators, not only to our community of CentrEau members, but also to users and research collaborators alike. CentrEau is a strategic group funded by the provincial funding agency, les Fonds de Recherche du Québec, in order to study water resources and its management. So today, our presenter is Joel Ducoste, professor in the Civil Construction and Environmental Engineering Department at North Carolina State University. And we're very happy to have him among us today. So his presentation is titled Improving Diversity in Environmental Engineering and Science. So Professor Ducoste has prepared a presentation of approximately 20 minutes. We will then have some 30 minutes maybe for questions afterward. And we'll take written questions. So I invite attendees to write the questions in the chat box and we'll read them at the end of the presentation. Si vous voulez poser une question en français, vous pouvez le faire et je tenterai de la traduire. We'll also take oral questions if you have any, so just mention that in the chat box. So Joe, I invite you to turn on your camera and share your screen with us, and then the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Je parle français un petit peu, mais pas très bien. Je ne comprends pas très bien encore. So that's about the limit of my French. I try to do that, but I know I'm way out of practice, so bear with me. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm grateful to presenting today to you all. Let me share my screen so that we can begin. Great, I hope everybody can see that. Let me see if I can, okay, now we're in presentation mode, fantastic. So today what I wanted to share with you is a topic of improving diversity in environmental engineering and science. It's something that is not my direct research. I am an environmental engineering faculty at NC State. I've been doing research in water and wastewater. I'll share a little bit about myself in a moment for about over 22 years, and if you include my previous practice in consulting. I used to work for CH2M Hill, now Jacobs Engineering, as a senior environmental engineer. I am currently also the president-elect of the Association of Environmental Engineering Science Professors, soon to be president starting this fall. So let me begin by telling you a story about myself. I am originally born in Haiti. I do not have a Haitian accent. I came to the United States with my parents when I was a baby. And so as everybody who has come from overseas to get a better opportunity as my parents had wanted to do. So, just to give you a little bit, that's me, my young self, bright, bushy tail, and trying to figure out the world. At some point, my father thought maybe I might be a game changer of the future. Something went terribly wrong at some point, and he had to send me to a military camp to straighten me out. Don't know if that helped a little bit, but maybe it did. To tell you a little bit of how I got into engineering, I've always been fascinated by science fiction. My favorite show growing up, some of you may remember, was Star Trek, and my favorite character was Spock. And so I thought I was Vulcan because, as you can see in this image, I have a pointy ear as well. So I'm thinking like, maybe I've got the brilliance as well as this Vulcan character. But then unfortunately another movie came out, and then I thought, well, maybe I was a gremlin and all bets are off. I know I tell poor jokes. My students always tell me that when I'm in class. Anyway, because of my fascination with science fiction, of course, I took my strongness in math and science and said, well, maybe I want to be an aerospace engineer, and was fascinated by the aerospace program in the US and thought that that was it. But I soon come to learn that much of the stuff that I wanted to do was more into the advanced technologies of robotics. And I actually got my master's and my bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering with a focus on advanced automation, and thinking that robots was us. I took that technology to go into work. I used to work for GE Aircraft Engines in their advanced manufacturing. And while I was at GE, I started to learn that they had a very strong interest in trying to be more environmentally compliant. And so I got a taste of environmental concerns and started investigating that. I found out that my interests lie more into the public health sector. And I started and went back to get my PhD in environmental engineering, focusing on drinking water and wastewater. This list gives you a bit of a picture about me and the multitudes of research areas that I have undertaken and been fortunate to invest much of my time in doing research. Some of it you will see cuts across obviously water and wastewater, but I also got into biofuels related to algae. I got into, even my latest venture was solid waste. I never would have thought I would be doing research in solid waste. But I have a colleague here at NC State that was interested in trying to understand the elevated temperature in landfills that we were seeing across the US, and asked if I could see and try to predict what might be the major players and actors that might be causing some of that. And I used some of my modeling techniques. I am a modeler as well as experimentalist, and use computational fluid dynamics to look at heat propagation in landfill. And we've got some very interesting results that have provided some interesting ideas and engineering solutions for landfill owners. So why I say that is because I wanted to share that with you about me and the diversity that produces disruptive, transformative solutions. And these are the kinds of things that we're looking for when you have different people and different actors that are involved in our field. So just to give you a little bit of who is pursuing environmental engineering and science, these are some information that comes from a couple of papers that we were fortunate to publish, just to give the landscape of what's going on about the people who are involved in our field. And you can see that when you're looking at it from a mixture of students and on the gender side, that among the different engineering disciplines, we're one of the most close to being split as it comes to male, female, those who are pursuing those different degrees. And it has basically stayed that way in the latest years, and is continuing to be fairly split across gender. Now, when you look at it from more specific demographics, the picture is not as well distributed, particularly between African American, Hispanic, Latino, Native American, and Pacific Islanders. We make up a very small percentage of the degrees granted in environmental engineering. And frankly, most of the STEM disciplines looks at this kind of very underrepresented population. It's different for different categories, as we're pointing out here. This kind of demographic split can be seen, of course, in our faculty. I mean, it is a pathway issue. The idea is that if you're not generating those who are in the best position to pursue these careers in academia, postdoctoral fellows, PhDs, you will not be able to populate into the academic professions as you've seen here, as well as in the industry, as we struggle to pride a place in that. And it's not only, of course, in the university realm or secondary, it is also in the K through 12, where we are trying to encourage those to say that you can be one in this very prolific field. And so this whole issue is something that is very complex, and still something that we challenge or struggle with in the US. While gender is improving, as well in the faculty ranks. It's still not perfect, and it definitely changes as you compare from assistant, associate to full professor. Again, we'll talk about some of these complexities, what might be barriers to the promotional things, but I've seen it serving on many of the reappointment, promotion, and tenure committees at all the different levels, that there are still challenges that cut across these kinds of promotional positions that we have to deal with. Now, when you say that gender is improving, again, if we do a deeper dive, the demographics paints a very different picture when you're talking about African American, Hispanic, Latino, Native American women in terms of where they are in the assistant, associate, full professor ranks. We are talking, again, still challenges that are now cuts across multiple demographics to try to understand what are the unique challenges that is preventing those to be well and broadening participation and inclusion of these different demographics. So what's the takeaway here? There's a lot of work that needs to be done in the US and I'm imagining globally in terms of underrepresentation, not only at the degree level, but you're talking about when you're looking at it in the professional ranks, at the professors level, at the staffing level, there are still some barriers that still inhibit what can be a way of trying to broaden participation, particularly in environmental engineering and all really engineering disciplines. So what kinds of things that I am doing? Well, I've spent 22 years in doing the technology side, the research side, done very well with it. But I have to tell you that it's only been in the last few years that I've been working on this problem of trying to see how can I improve what I see in my audience. It's been very disheartening to me that things have not changed when I look at outside in the classroom to try to see what's going on and not seeing more of myself. And I'll talk about, is it my responsibility? No, and that's another challenge is because oftentimes university places the burden on already faculty members like myself to be doing all of this work, but yet we have research programs, we have research ideas that need to get on, but it's us that are stepping up to the plate to trying to help broaden this participation. So as president of AESP, I'm working with a number of different organizations, Water Environment Federation, Air and Waste Association, American Water Works, working with the leaders to try to figure out what kinds of programs can we be doing to increase and broaden participation of our profession. More recently, working with Water Environment Federation with their inflow program, where they're doing wonderful things in exposing the water business to underrepresented groups across a number of universities, inviting students to take a look at what we do in the water business sector. My goal is to try to help with all these other kinds of associations to develop similar, not exactly the same type of programs as that. Personally, at the universities, lots of things that we can be doing. We do things about trying to go to conferences, try to engage minority engineering programs on our campuses and on different campuses. I personally go to different universities. We call these historically Black colleges and universities, or Hispanic serving institutions, minority serving institutions. I go out to these places to try to showcase what kinds of things can they be doing and what kinds of things we can be doing to help those go into graduate school, make that transition from undergraduate to graduate, providing professional development, trying to demonstrate the kinds of things that we can help with in shepherding and broadening participation in our discipline. It is not only at those universities, we go out to different associations, National Society of Black Engineers, Society of Hispanic Engineers, these different minority serving type of associations. We have to get out there. As many people can get out, show interest, be excited about what we do. when we show excitement about this and interest in getting them to join us in solving the problems that we are very curious about, that's what encourages, that provides a sense of belonging, inclusion that is often absent and necessary at our institutions. So kinds of things that we do to show that encouragement. We offer resume, curriculum vitae workshops, interviewing techniques to improve the opportunity to do better for landing jobs, graduate school workshops, kinds of things to improve application, improving personal statements. How do you show about research statements, getting fellowships? We do all these kinds of things to help improve that pipeline into graduate school, which would lead to these higher level positions in our fields, including research experience for undergrads. We have these programs here in the US, again, to highlight these things at the undergraduate, show them about research methods, making presentations about their research topics, showing how to do better presentation, writing skills, all of those things that are important to building strong researchers in our profession. Those are the kinds of things that I'm going out and doing, and many of us are now trying to do more effectively at our institutions. So I know I may be running on time, but just a little bit of a summary. You know, I told you a little bit about myself, some of the challenge that we have in terms of the state of environmental engineering, a little bit of the strategies that we're using to broaden participation in engineering. Now, here's the reality. Will it be easy? Absolutely not. There's a lot of things more than just recruitment that is necessary for doing these kinds of things. We have to be ready to work on our campuses, in our companies, about demonstrating inclusivity. What does that mean? Removing things related to unconscious bias, stereotype threats, microaggressions that seem to pose problems, and demonstrating that we are putting up an inclusive environment at our locations. A sense of belonging, that we are demonstrating that you belong here, not only from the faculty level, not only from the graduate student level, but we also have to educate our undergraduates. That pipeline, what students do to each other can affect that sense of belonging, that can affect their presence and their persistence to stay in that STEM field and be a success and a continued leadership in these STEM fields. What kinds of things that are barriers that are placed in a number of areas? Search committees for faculty positions, admission processes, what are kinds of things that are there in the promotion process, award process. All of these things could have in it buried issues that poses challenges for the persistence of underrepresented groups in our field. And we really have to look closely to see what could we be doing inadvertently that may impose a barrier to that persistence or that entry. So I always show this example just to give you an idea. It's like, you may understand that here's a simple picture of an unfiltered water that is now being used for plant growth. And we still see plant growth that happen. But if we took out some of the components in that filtered water, we might be able to see stronger plant growth, right? So what if we took the picture and said that unfiltered water is now microaggressions, unconscious bias, stereotype threats? Well, we still may have an environment where ideas are being generated and all these kinds, and we have some kind of level of inclusion, but not as much as if we really worked on setting up an inclusive environment. We would have much greater productivity, much more richness in developing transformative solutions that we would never see if we didn't have that kind of inclusive environment. The ideas, the innovation, the brainstorming session would be out of this world. And that's what we're trying to get at, that idea of being able to be in that format. So what inhibits that is some of these kinds of barriers, such as biases related to gender, race, and other demographics. But just realize that there are other kinds of barriers that could lead to this entry and persistence and ability to provide such diversity in our workforce. And it is all these things together, these biases that all of us have. I have some biases that unfortunately come out, and I have to sometimes recognize, ooh, that was a mistake. Own up to it, try to minimize it. When it happens, quickly correct it. If it was something that was unconscious, we all have it as human beings. We just have to figure out ways to minimize that. So again, we are exploring this. I show this image because what we're trying to do is develop a richness and diversity, individuality that you can see in this color spectrum. But what we don't want is this blending, this mixing to happen to make us, again, become uniform. We all have our skill sets, and we want to make sure that we have the right skill sets for the job that we're trying to do. There's no question of that. We want to develop that. But we don't want to destroy the individuality that that person brings to it. And sometimes we do that because of these barriers and these threats and these unconscious bias by saying certain things that make the person feel unwelcome, it provides a lack of belonging that we're trying to create. So we want this on the left, we do not want this on the right. So one of the things I've said, and this I'm getting towards the end here, is that if you're in a meeting, right, you think we might have everybody at the table that should be there representing the ideas that you need for that meeting. I challenge you to place one other position in there, a chair with a sign in front of it saying missing opinion. Why do I say that? Is because you don't all necessarily have all the opinions that you need to make an informed decision. There is always something that you could be doing to get more opinion. And it's just a reminder about looking around the room and saying, do we have all the right pieces of people that could share some really unique ideas from their perspective that could make this solution not just be a marginal solution, but a transformative solution? That's what we want to be able to get at. So with that, I want to close up and just say I appreciate the opportunity. I hope you got some ideas. I'm willing to answer some questions. I'll stop sharing my screen so that people can see me a little bit, and hope that there is something that I can continue to help with and educate. And I thank you for your time.
Well, thank you so very much, Joe. That was a very eye-opening and very interesting presentation. Just a quick note to everyone that you will find Professor Ducoste's presentation on the CentrEau website later on.
Yes.
But we will now begin the question session. So if anyone has questions, please write them in the chat box or notify us if you wish to ask questions aloud. Now, Joe, I would invite you to please read the questions first before answering so that those watching the video later on may be able to follow.
I'm looking at the chat now, and I'll read one from my good friend and colleague, Peter. And is the problem you showed us start at the university or before in secondary school? It's a great question. The interesting thing is that it definitely starts at the lower levels. The sense of belonging and what is being encouraged by instructors, teachers, guidance counselors. I can tell you from my own experience that I went to a predominantly white high school. It was a private institution. My mother wanted to pay for the best education, and I appreciate it. I took everything in it, and it really helped me well. But, you know, it was not all, I had maybe 2 or 3 guidance counselors. We had more than one just because you're paying money. I think only one of the guidance counselors just said, oh, I see that you're good in math and science. Maybe you should be thinking about engineering. And if it weren't for that, you know, guidance counselor, I probably may not have started looking into these kinds of places to see about engineering as a possibility. I've been very fortunate growing up. My parents were well-to-do, and I knew about some of the other professions very well, medical doctor, lawyer, all of that kind of stuff, but never, pretty much didn't resonate with me. And I was very excited about, and when I learned that engineering was a possible outlet. I mean, I got that from science fiction, but the name was placed, engineering. I heard it in Star Trek. They said, engineering, it's not the train track or anything like that, but it was a discipline that required a certain level of expertise. But the bottom line, Peter and others, we do have to get down to the, at least the high school. I think in elementary, the kids are early enough, they're starting to explore. It's not where things start to deviate. It really starts to deviate at what we call the high school, the ninth grade through 12th grade, or in that region where things are starting to, you're starting to get the more disciplines in math and science. And that's the other thing. Be very mindful for track and engineering. You have to get the higher level math early on. So the calculus and stuff, and many of us don't take that track. We're not encouraged to take that track. And that happens in ninth grade and actually in eighth grade for us in the US. So I have a very interesting story. I know I'm taking a long time answering one question, but I have an interesting story. In order for me to get into the calculus track, which I got in high school, and I wouldn't, unless it was without the persistence of my father. In eighth grade at a different school, I was not in the math class that would take an early class to get me in ninth grade to take trigonometry. And I had to do that in order to be on the calculus track. But I had to take an exam to prove myself. The elementary school that I was going was not going to allow me to take it because I did not take their particular math class. My father said, no, I've been tutoring him myself, and he has, and he is ready and prepared for that exam. They said no, and he fought them, and they said, okay, we'll let him take it, but he will not represent our school. So I was taking it as an independent. I scored a 95 on that exam. I was the sixth highest, and they lost out on the opportunity of demonstrating that I was part of that class and what they can do. But that was my father who was belligerent about allowing me to take the exam because he knew I could do well on that exam, and in fact, I did. That was the only way I can get into that track. Otherwise, I would not have been able to take calculus in high school. So I wanted to share that story. Let's see, other questions. Let's see. Thank you so much. What would be, for your point of view, the key to accelerate HQP recruitment of minorities by PIs? So
HQP,
I'm talking about...
HQP is highly qualified professionals. This is Canadian.
Okay. Is there some key action that would bring them to see great value of diversity so our lab are more diverse? Peter, can you say what HQP? I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. I apologize.
High quality professional.
Okay.
Researchers, basically.
Yeah. So here's the thing. If you allow just the natural system to progress where you have talented individuals who take that track, note that there are a few of us. So everybody in every university in Canada is going after those very few individuals. And the challenge is that for the PIs, for the research, what you have to do is provide as much opportunity at the undergraduate. So in other words, the best recruitment to get at the graduate level is the investment that you make to the undergraduate level. This is a challenge even at our universities, even though we do it, but oftentimes many faculty like to offer their research experience for undergraduates to students in their own backyard, let alone students elsewhere. And so for me, there has to be a proactive effort at the undergraduate level to provide exposure, to identify these scholars early and continue to communicate with them. Show that you are very excited by how they did in your research group at the undergraduate level, and that you foresee that there may be an opening a few years down the road at the graduate level. But this is how you groom that potential pathway, is the investment that is made at the undergraduate level to set up that pipeline. Now, it cannot be done just by your university. This is a concerted effort that has to be done nationally. Everybody has to work in a collective to help, because if everybody does it, then we have a much larger pool that's not all going to go to Laval, that's not going to go all to McGill, that's not all going to go to all the other University of Toronto, the top universities that in Canada or elsewhere. They're going to go because there's a richness in the population, and therefore now you have an excellent pathway that will lead to a natural diversifying agent throughout that graduate level. Let's see. I think I ran through did I miss any? I'm sorry. I think I missed a question. Let's see.
Yes, Peter's first question was, you discussed the U.S. situation. Do you have some insight in whether these equity diversity issues are different internationally at universities?
That's a tough one. I more or less know what is happening in the U.S. I'm not familiar about what might be happening in Europe or South America or even Canada. I would say that probably the challenges are about the same for students of color overall. I can't imagine that there is a significant difference if you look at it from Europe or Canada, but I have to admit, I do not have the data to support that answer. I can only say by optics. I often argue with my colleagues who like to look at numbers and only make decisions based on numbers. Yes, we are all data driven. There is no question. That's why we're in the field that we are, that we use data to inform us about making the appropriate best next decisions. But at the same time, I also say that if the optics looks bad, it's probably the data is going to support it. Now, at the end of the day, we need the data to make sure that we are making improvements, to have accountability on whatever actions that we said will make improvement. Is that true? Did those things that you said that you've laid out, did they show a difference or an impact? So data will always be important. I just am always dismayed by those who need the data first without saying, well, wait a minute, can't you look around you to say there is a problem? The data is only going to support it. Why do we need to wait for that? But I understand that you would eventually need that data, and that data needs to be made public. That's another challenge. Often a lot of universities like to hoard that data and not allow the general public to look at it. But sometimes when transparency is open, it makes it more challenging and almost puts a self-accountability when you open that transparency. Not everything, but enough on these things, you can be pretty transparent. I can look at some of other universities and know what's going on more so than I can tell what's happening at our university. And so our university needs to work on that. And I'm working with them to say we need to be more transparent about these things. So, but to answer your question, Peter, I'm not as familiar with international levels compared to ours. I just know ours, we need a lot of work. Let me see if I can see some other ones. Any other from the live audience, raising hands or speaking up if I can share some?
Actually, I have a question that I was having a hard time typing, which would revolve around, given that there are natural differences and preferences between different STEM fields, between, say, men and women. And I don't mean this to be a trick question, but like, what would be the ideal ratio then? I don't know if you understand my
You're talking
question.
about in terms of when should we not worry anymore?
That's correct.
That we've reached. Well,
Or
let
if
me
you have
put it,
any insight on that.
well, let me put it this way. For example, for us, at minimum, the population we serve in North Carolina, we should at least have a similar representation, and it doesn't have to be exact numbers, but give or take plus or minus, there should be on a percent population basis reasonable representation that reflects the population that we serve at minimum. Now, should we, if it turns out that we go one way to the opposite way, then I will have to see what happened here. Because again, it's about diversity. You know, the microbiologists out there will argue that in some cases, diverse microcosm are better suited to handle the challenges that they are dealing with from a treatment process or natural systems. In other cases, you don't want that diversity. You want much more or a more narrowing of that to tackle that particular, you know, substrate or things that you're trying to remove, right? For me, in this case, I think because the problems, you never know what's going to be in front of us. It's more or less like that variability that we never know that we might have to deal with. Under those conditions, you want as much diversity as possible. Because in that case, we will be able to solve those problems that we are unprepared for now, but in the future we will be, because we have representation of people with unique characteristics that have unique backgrounds that they bring to the table to help solve that problem. So that's why we need and always strive for diversity, because we never know the problems we will be facing in the future. We must be prepared to solve those problems. We cannot be one-sided one way or the other. Did I answer your question?
Very well, thank you. We have another question.
Yep. Unconscious bias.
Can you just read the question first?
Can you give some examples of unconscious bias? So there is an implicit bias test that one could take. I think it's very well known. It's offered, I think, by Harvard University, but don't quote me on this. And I think it's an implicit association test. And what they do is they try to show images of different things, and then they put at the bottom, you know, who would you think as an engineer, or some question that you would associate with one person or another. And from answering those questions very quickly, because you can't think about it, because if you think about it, you'll be like, oh, I know what they're asking. They think that I will not pick that person because they're going to think I have an unconscious bias. But you will find that, you know, depending what that is, if like medical doctors, should they be male or female, or a computer scientist, or something like that, or a game, who is a person who likes to play computer games, and you pick a person that you, just out of your, you know, quick thought of, oh yeah, that's what I'm familiar with. Because of these subtle familiarities, that's where the unconscious bias comes into play. These are things that are in our psyche that I think, you know, the psychologists know this better than I do. Were born out of a protection mechanism for animals to know that, oh, I think that creature is going to hurt me because I recognize it and I associate it with somebody that's going to eat me. So I got to do something else. So it's a maybe an innate mechanism that we continue to have that is built on a lot of exposure from what we see on television, what we see are who are the most frequent workers. And, you know, for me, it's like if I walk into a room, the expectation that I'm the one that's going to give the presentation is unlikely because of what I look like. There have been many times when I was young and I walked into a room and people ask, oh, where's the bathroom? Not the where's the bathroom. I'm trying to think of the exact, because that could be asked by anybody. I mean, that's the truth. I forgot that example, but with more gray hair, I can't even think of the examples at the moment. But the bottom line is this quick association of what you think should be, when in fact it is the opposite. That kind of what I'm talking about in terms of what is an example of an own kind. But that, I see it's in the chat about the implicit bias. This is a very interesting exam. If you've not taken it, you'll be very surprised. And you have to be honest with yourself. You got to pick the answers quickly. Stuff that just comes into your mind. That's when you will realize what it is. And it's, you know, there's a lot of things else, other things that we have to be worried about. That's just one.
John, can you give me the? Yeah, I would like to ask a question in person. Everybody sounds different because we speak mother tongues that are different than the language that we use in our conversations, French or English, in case of CentrEau. I've been put into the minority of the allophones, which is the people that speak other languages than the ones that are in use in the country, which was an interesting experience to be labeled like this. Mm-hmm. I would like to have you talk about this because you've shown in the iceberg that the visible minority is there, the gender is there, sexual orientation may be there. I saw language was there as well. And I felt that good because in my university was the first time I was called an allophone, and I realized I am in a minority. I am suffering from the fact that I cannot express myself in my mother tongue. You don't have the subtleties that you can bring about. Okay, my English has been trained, my French is going well. I think in America you have the same thing because you have all this international students, universities show it. But I think it's important for us all to realize that not speaking the language that everybody's using, being English, that this hampers some people to develop as much as they could. And I would like just to reflect on this and see, because you come from Haiti or maybe also another mother tongue from the beginning, or not, I don't know, but how you reflect on this and how universities have to deal with this. And I just explained it, for instance, in CentrEau, the language is French normally. When we have English, of course, and many students are speaking English, but we have this problem, okay, how do we manage our way of communicating with people? Do we always have both languages? You've heard the introduction, yeah. It's kind of not that easy, right?
No, and so in the US, the Latino Hispanic community is growing, right? And in fact, in 2050, that will be the reason why the US will become a majority minority at that time. It's because of that population. And so there is always a question mark of, okay, we are English speaking, but what is wrong with also, and you see it around, of also displaying things in Spanish to be fair, so that there is that ability, just in case things are not as clear. You'll get different responses from different people about this. For me, in terms of inclusivity, recognizing that it's just another way to demonstrate that inclusivity, I am for it. I think that when there is an ability, particularly if it's a large sector of a population that can speak that tongue, that we have to demonstrate that it's okay. You know, there is a primary language, I would say, you know, secondary language. Now, in universities in general, you have all different kinds. And I would say, I think it's a challenge. I mean, I probably do not have a great answer for this in terms of for the language.
But would you think that people are considering the fact that a person that is not able to speak the language is good, that the evaluation of that person is slightly different? Imagine you have the first talk you have to give, right? You're not a native English speaker, but you have to give it in English. Many of the students here in the room have suffered from this. They have to go up to a big hill to be able to do that, right? It's not easy. No. And we've all gone through it. I think at some point that you have to, like you said a few words in French. If we had asked you to do some more, you would have had difficulty.
Yes, I would have struggled a lot. You're right. It's not fair. Are there biases against that as well? I think where the bias comes in is the expectation that foreigners write English or grammar worse than US. And that is absolutely not true. Because I can point to a lot of US students who cannot write for beans, and I can point to a lot of international students who write extremely well. And it has all to do with just training. And that's a bias, right? Immediately you're going to assume, oh, I have to work with this student to write. And then you find out, I only have to do 2 drafts, where I have a person from an excellent school in the US and we're on our 9th draft and I'm struggling, right? So it's one of those kinds of things that really, we shouldn't be even having these kinds of biases, including for this, that each person is different. We have to treat individual for what they bring to the table, how much training that we need to share, and recognize that they, you know, like I said, I applaud every international to come to the US to learn. If I had to go to Laval and learn mechanical engineering, and French is my 2nd or 3rd tongue, it would be a struggle. So I applaud everybody who comes from overseas, who come here to learn. And so I treat every individual, and what we need to do is treat every individual specifically and say, what's your skill sets? Don't impose any bias about whether you are going to do well in this or not because you came from here. That's the same thing with, you know, to try to stay as neutral as possible is the best thing, but it's difficult. I think that's.
Thank you.
Any other questions that I can help you with? I hope everybody got an idea of kinds of things to think about. This is not a one-time learning experience. This is what I call, and I tell my administration, this is a living agenda, because there will always be a need to make sure that we have representation. We can never be satisfied, because even if we say, oh, we've reached a point where everything is great, you know, something will change in the future. I can't tell you what the population is going to look like in 2200. I won't be alive. Maybe I'll come back as something else. But the point is, this is a living agenda that we have to be mindful of. Put processes in place. If we have processes in place, we will never run into this problem ever again, because it's the process. It's not about the specific thing that we're trying to solve. It's the process that we have developed that it safeguards against biases, that safeguards against barriers that will inhibit inclusivity, that safeguards against barriers that will not allow a sense of belonging. Whoever that individual is, they must feel welcome, that they are somebody who's going to contribute, not be an outsider looking in. Because they don't look like you, they don't sound like you, doesn't mean that they don't have the same passion for solving the problems, the same learning that they want to do just as you, okay? This is the thing that we're trying to solve. So it's a process, all right? And that's the thing that we need to work on, so that the process is enduring and that it gets tweaks along the way to make sure that that process is effective, and making sure that we have a diverse population. Because like I said, diversity breeds transformative solutions. We can no longer operate on margins. The problems we are faced, as you all know, I know you're working on complex solutions. You don't have to sell me on that. But wouldn't it be wonderful that that one additional person that you didn't know all of a sudden comes in with a thing because of their unique background? They have the same training as you, but they come from a different location that brings them the creativity that you don't have, okay? And that's the thing that we're trying to make sure that we get that inclusivity built into that process.
Well, thank you so very much again, Professor Joel Ducoste. And thank you for the very rich discussion along the presentation. And thank you everybody for participating as well. I have noted a total of 42 simultaneous participants, which is great considering the summer period in which we find ourselves, aka the vacation period. So don't miss our next webinars. So every Thursday, starting at 1 p.m. Next Thursday, we will greet Esther Shaler from UNICEF, who will present on failures in the wash sector, so wash for the water, sanitation, and hygiene sector, so that we may learn from one another's mistakes. So this should be a very interesting, if not possibly tongue-in-cheek. So the next presentation will also be in English. Donc la prochaine présentation aura également lieu en anglais. We hope to see you all again next week. Don't forget that you may always subscribe to the events via the CentrEau website. And let me remind you once more that all recordings of the webinars are available on our YouTube channel. So thank you all and see you next Thursday.
Merci beaucoup and bonne journée.